The extra desk was my first clue that something was wrong. Nobody was sitting in it, and it wasn't on the seating chart. There it was, in the middle of the left-hand row. I know it might not seem like a big deal to some people, but the seating chart is the substitute teacher's Bible, a life preserver in a sea of similar names and children who all look essentially alike. So if it's not on the seating chart, it's a problem. A major problem. Like I said, there was something wrong in that classroom. "Whose desk is that?" I asked. "It's Sadie's," said a boy sitting in front. He wore glasses and a sweater. His hair was combed to the side so meticulously that it could have only been done by his mother. I rechecked the seating chart. The sweater boy was Miles. "There's no Sadie in this class," I said. "Why is there a desk for somebody who's not in this class?" "Because she's dead," answered Miles. Maybe it was a prank. If so, I'd have to squash it immediately with extreme prejudice. And on the other hand, if the children really had lost a classmate, I'd need to react with sensitivity and compassion. This is what makes subbing so hard. "Well, it's clearly a distraction," I said, buying time. "I'm moving it out of the classroom." The desks were heavy, old-fashioned kind with a hollow storage area under a wooden top that lifts up and down. A serious finger-smashing hazard. I dragged it around the back of the room, its metal legs screeching on the linoleum floor like the gates of hell opening. Struggling and slipping in my dress shoes, I wrestled that monster into the hall and I left it at the top of the stairs. I peeked inside. It was empty except for a single blue crayon with child-sized bite marks and most of its label peeled off. I left it there. The children pushed the remaining desks together to fill the gap in the row, and then spent the rest of the morning on their schoolwork. Their teacher, Mrs. Cross, was recuperating from a back injury. She'd planned every part of every day, an endless series of projects to keep the kids busy. I texted her. "Hi, this is Aaron, your sub. Anything I should know about Sadie?" While I waited for a response, I took a look around. There was this big old clock above the classroom door, the type that's inside a cage bolted to the wall, like you'd see in a gymnasium. It ticked so loudly, and the second hand moved so unevenly, so spastically, it felt like an eternity between ticks. The next one coming, only when it seemed it never would. It was going to drive me nuts. The classroom was technically in the attic, up a flight of stairs and isolated from the rest of the school. It was a huge space that included a long dark hallway lined with hooks and cubbies, leading to our own personal bathroom. Except for its size and the luxury of a private restroom, it was an ordinary classroom. But it didn't feel ordinary. Maybe it was the lighting. There were only a few high, small windows on one wall and flickering overhead fluorescents that went out periodically. Old wiring, I guess. It was cold in there too. Always cold. The place just felt off, like writing with your non-dominant hand, or how it feels when you touch something wet that's not supposed to be. Attempts have been made to spruce it up, of course. A carpet with a cheerful hopscotch pattern ran the length of the hallway to the bathroom, and a mural covered the rear wall of the classroom. Floor-to-ceiling butcher paper the kids had decorated with colorful drawings. But still, these small improvements were negligible, like trying to soak up a flood with a hand towel. When the bell rang for lunch, we went to the cafeteria and then to the playground for recess. The children ran around while the teachers looked at their phones. We weren't allowed to use them inside the school, and when I was growing up, teachers used to smoke during recess, so I suppose this was an improvement. Mrs. Cross had texted back. "Students will work on projects I planned. No need to do anything else." I replied, "What about the extra desk? Miles said it belongs to Sadie." Mrs. Cross replied back, "The furniture is not our problem. Contact the custodian." Great. Evidently Mrs. Cross wasn't going to be helpful. And to make things worse, when we got back from recess, someone had moved the empty desk back into our classroom, put it right back in its spot in the middle of the left-hand row, What the hell? Who moved the desk back in here? I asked. The custodian, suggested a girl whose name I thought was Emmeline. Possible, but unlikely. How would he have known where to put it? No, it had to be the students, which meant it was definitely a prank. Anxiety tightened around my stomach. I think it was someone in this room, I said. Does anyone want to tell me about it? The classroom was silent except for the indeterminable ticking of the horrible clock. I can wait all day, I added. The children squirmed. The clock ticked. And finally, Miles raised his hand. It was Sadie, he said. I thought she was dead. The kids whispered and shifted in their seats. I ran my finger down the seating chart, stopping randomly on a name. Emma? We're not supposed to talk about her. Why not? Because she's a ghost, Miles answered, too loudly. My phone buzzed. I instructed the kids to continue with their projects. Mrs. Cross had texted again. Miles is gifted. Be careful with him. In college, I majored in education with a minor in psychology, so I know all about gifted children. Basically, they're smarter than you and better than you in any number of unimaginable ways. This one would be a musical visionary, an artistic prodigy, or a charismatic, manipulative genius. That one might have a supernatural memory, or know physics like most people know breathing. You can never tell what you're dealing with. Just before class ended, I called Miles up for a private chat. Gifted children need recognition, encouragement, and the opportunity to share. Thanks for telling me about Sadie, I said. Was she your friend? Certainly not, he replied. She's a dreadful girl. Besides, she died years ago. What happened to her? Miles rolled a pencil back and forth on my desk, watching it. Don't be afraid, Miles. You can tell me anything. He stopped the pencil. Will you believe me no matter what? Yes, I trust you. I know you wouldn't lie. A huge smile spread across his face and he turned away quickly to hide it. When he looked back at me, all the tension had left his features. May I have a snack, please? Mrs. Cross keeps my preservative-free fruit leathers in the large bottom drawer. I eat one whenever I'm afflicted by energy depletion. The drawer was stocked with a zillion packs of foods designed for every dietary need. Gluten-free, nut-free, sugar-free, fat-free, you name it. I handed Miles a nasty-looking fruit atrocity. He nodded for a moment before regaining sufficient energy to continue. Sadie was an angel in the school play. When it was over, she had forgotten to return a candle to the prop room. Miles took another bite and he looked thoughtful. Isn't it strange how everybody assumes angels have candles? The idea is absurd. I nodded like I had an opinion on the matter. Anyway, she took her candle to the attic where they used to keep the props and she got locked in. It was dark as a black hole. There weren't any windows yet. She couldn't see anything, not even how to turn on the lights. What happened to her? I asked. She died, right here in this room. It used to be the attic. Did you know? That's so sad, I said. Well, she shouldn't have been running off by herself, should she? Unpleasant things happen to children who wander. I guess that's sometimes true, but I don't. The janitor found her curled up in the ground, still wearing her angel costume and holding the candle. She'd scratched her name into the floor almost 3 times with her fingernails. Didn't anybody hear her? Didn't her family look for her? I haven't the faintest idea, Miles answered. But she's a ghost now and she wants something. I can feel it. What? He gazed at the clock over the door as though trying to formulate the right words. I waited patiently, thinking about Sadie's cruel death. Alone in a place filled with people, in the dark holding a candle she could never light. What had happened to the words she'd carved into the floor? Had someone sanded them out? Or were they hidden beneath the linoleum that now covered everything? The erratic seconds ticked by and finally Miles spoke, a fraction of a second before the dismissal bell rang. "She wants to hurt us," he said, and then the bell screeched, perfectly timed, like a jump scare in a movie. I almost wet my pants. Miles grinned. The kid had a flair for the dramatic. Before we left that day, he gave me a secret hug. "Thank you," he whispered. "It was one of the proudest moments of my teaching career." After the kids had gone home, I took off my shoes and I pushed the desk out to the landing at the top of the stairs again. I put a note on it, asking the custodian to move it to storage. I couldn't stop thinking about that ghastly little angel ghost who wanted to hurt us. At home that night, I did some internet research and I found only one student at the school who passed away. A girl named Abigail Potter. It was about 10 years ago. Supposedly, there was a butterfly garden named in her honor somewhere beyond the school, but I didn't find anything about Sadie. The next morning, I arrived at school to find the extra desk back in the classroom, squatting like a smug toad in the middle of its row. My note to the custodian was gone. I left a message with the front office, pushed the desk out the door again, and I taped a more emphatic message to it this time. I studied the mural on the back wall. The drawings were typical for grade schoolers. Dragons, rainbows, emojis, cats, basketballs. In between the pictures, though, the word Sadie had been written over and over in groups of threes. The weirdest part was that the very last E was always missing. Miles had said Sadie had scratched her name into the floor, almost 3 times. Did this have something to do with that? And why was somebody writing it on the mural? Suddenly, I knew what to do. A psychological assessment. My favorite has always been the draw a person in the rain test or the DPRT. You ask your subject to draw a person in the rain, but you give no additional instructions, which allows for complete artistic freedom, and then you analyze the drawings. Excessive rain indicates high levels of stress, fear, and feelings of being threatened. The use, absence, and effectiveness of umbrellas and raincoats gauges capacity to cope, and the belief in one's ability to survive. While the children drew, I perused Mrs. Cross's past lesson plans. Her class was always doing something cool. Research projects, field trips, poetry contests, science experiments. The last Friday of every month was Blanket Fort Friday, which sounded like the best thing ever. Tucked in the back of the lesson plan book, I found newspaper clippings with Mrs. Cross written above the title, like someone had cut it out and saved it for her. It was about school hauntings. Ask anyone about the schools they've attended, the article said, and they'll have a ghost story about at least one of them, guaranteed. Reading further, I learned that child ghosts tend to attach themselves to something solid, often a physical place where they had good memories, like a school or perhaps to a smaller object that was important to them. The writer used a pack of baseball cards as an example. A young boy in South Texas had been killed by a schoolmate for stealing his baseball cards. The schoolmate went to prison and the cards were lost, and the boy's ghost haunted the school. Years later, the cards were found hidden behind a shelf in the library. They were destroyed, and after that, the ghost finally left. It made me think of Sadie's candle, the one she had paid the ultimate price for trying to return, the one she'd been holding when she died. I had so many questions. Was the candle still in the school? Why had Mrs. Cross kept the newspaper clipping? Was she hiding something from me? Why were the students afraid to talk about Sadie? And did she have anything in her snack drawer besides gross kids' food? I dug through the snack stash again, hoping I'd overlooked something before, like chocolate, but all I found were a few loose screws rolling around the bottom of the drawer, and their threads a powdery white. Miles got up to use the pencil sharpener mounted on the wall. He didn't move his arms when he walked. He just kept them tight to his sides, and his back was stiff and straight. He looked like a serial killer in a movie. Poor kid. When he stuck his pencil into the sharpener, there was a deafening crash. It took a moment to understand the sound had nothing to do with Miles. It was the clock. It had fallen off the wall along with its metal cage, shattering on the floor. We were stunned into silence as the clattering and clanging of clock pieces died down. It had missed Miles by an inch. Grabbing his shoulders, I looked him over for injuries. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "Everybody okay?" The rest of the children cowered like trapped rabbits, their eyes huge. The clock was obliterated, fragments everywhere. All that remained on the wall were pottery plaster holes where the screws had been. "How'd that happen?" I asked. "It was Sadie," said Miles. "It was Miles," said a girl named Emily, at the exact same time. She pointed an accusing finger at him, and when he looked at her, she crossed her arms and she stared at the floor. "Do you mean Miles made the clock fall?" I asked. Emily shrugged, keeping her eyes down. "She thinks I made Sadie come. She thinks it's my fault." "Like Abby," Emily whispered. I was 98% sure there was no Abby in this class, but I couldn't look at the seating chart again. The kids would think I hadn't learned their names yet. "We're not supposed to talk about this," wailed a boy whose name I didn't know, his voice rising into hysteria. Other kids were sniffling, maybe crying. "Okay, class, hand in your drawings, it's time for PE." I glanced at the clock before remembering it wasn't there anymore. "Everything is fine, I promise." That turned out to be a huge lie. Remember how the DPRT is a reflection of a mental state? Well, judging from their drawings, those kids were anything but fine. They'd drawn deluges, thick black scribbles of torrential rain, lightning, floods, leaking raincoats, broken umbrellas, hair sodded and stringy and soaked, eyes squeezed shut against the downpour. The results were off the charts, astonishing stress levels, an alarming inability to cope, authentic fear, from all of them. Luckily, with my background and training, I knew how to help them. The smile box. I'd invented it for my final grade in applied classroom child psychology. It was a wooden box covered in cheerful wrapping paper with a mail slot at the top and a small locked door in the back. Kids could confidentially share their secrets, their comments, and questions by putting them in the box. Open communication without repercussions. That's the smile box way. Ever since I'd started at the school, I'd felt that I had a higher reason for being there, like there was something I was meant to do. And now I knew. It wasn't to watch the kids complete project after project. It wasn't even teaching. It was healing. We were going to establish trust, conquer fears, and rebuild stability. By the time Mrs. Krause came back, the children would be happy and carefree. She wouldn't even recognize them. I brought the smile box in the next day, set it up on the side table, and explained it to the kids. Just because it's against the rules to talk about something doesn't mean you can't write about it. They were busy with another project, but they kept glancing over there, unable to concentrate on anything else. They were already planning what to write. It was so exciting. Soon after, we had another rainy afternoon, which meant indoor recess. While the kids watched a movie, I went through the smile box. It was a huge success. Here's a random sample. I think it shows a fascinating insight into a child's psyche. Emmy didn't wash her hands after she peed. I saw you texting and we're not supposed to have phones in school. My mom doesn't wear her seatbelt. I look like a horse. Sadie pushed Mrs. Krause on the stairs and made her hurt her back. Spelling bees are dumb. This should be called the Miles box. He's the only one who uses it. Sadie. 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 Halfway through the movie, we heard something odd. A stomping noise, like someone hopscotching on the carpet in our back hallway. I thought it was one of the kids heading to the bathroom, but they were all sitting on the story rug, eyes on the TV. They hadn't even reacted. When we heard it again a few minutes later, I stood up so quickly my chair shot out and hit the wall behind me. The children jumped and looked at me, startled. Pieces of chalk fell from the chalkboard tray to the floor. Moving swiftly across the room, I paused next to the opening to the back hallway, and the children watched. The overhead lights blinked and went out and came back on, and then we heard it again. That hopscotching, a rhythmic, pounding sound, a thumping cadence like the throbbing and pulsing of a horror movie's victim's heart. Taking a deep breath, I swung around the corner, prepared for anything. But there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. The sound had stopped. Continuing to the bathroom, I flung open the door and I flipped on the light. Empty. I hurried back to the classroom, ignoring all the coats hanging on the hooks. I know, I should have checked behind them, but I couldn't. As I sped past, they looked like children standing in a row, a little girl in an angel costume among them. It was nothing. I told the kids when I returned to the classroom, but they had already turned back to their movie. The only other employee at the school even close to my age was Hordoff, the art teacher. Nobody called him Mr. Hordoff, not even the kids. It was just plain Hordoff. Every day he wore tan corduroys and scuffed brown shoes with thick plastic soles. Unattractive, but silent. Teacher shoes. Hordoff kept a lumpy clay heart paperweight on his desk. It was glazed shiny red with veins and arteries like a real human heart, but one made by a child. I could never stop playing with it whenever I went to his classroom. "Don't break my heart," he'd say, winking. When I told him about everything that had been happening, he laughed. "Sadie's back, huh? You've heard of her. Is she real?" There was a girl named Sadie who died in the school a long time ago. So in that sense, yes, she was real once. But there's no evil angel ghost with an evil revenge curse. That part is decidedly not real. Evil revenge curse. That thing about writing her name, you know. I shook my head. Hordoff explained while doing the wide-eyed arm-waving people do to sarcastically indicate something mystical. Writing her name 3 times opens the door for her to come into our world. And once she does that, she will kill us all because it's not fair that we get to live and she had to die. That's scary, Hordoff. He leaned forward in his chair. It isn't real, Aaron. The kids are playing a joke on you. You know that, right? No way. They're not faking this. They're afraid. You can't argue with the DPRT. We've had Sadie stories in the school forever. Why would the kids suddenly be scared now? Maybe nobody's ever listened to them before. Look, who told you about Sadie first? Hordoff rubbed his eyes. Was it Miles? Yeah, so? There's your culprit. He who smelt it dealt it, Aaron. Wise words. You're saying this is Miles' fault. He took the DPRT test too, remember? That kid has taken 1,000,000 tests. His intellect has been probed and prodded his entire life. Don't you think he's learned how to manipulate results? I snorted. That's ridiculous. Miles is an angel. Hordoff shook his head and he laughed again. That's what they say about Sadie. After school, I sat in my darkening classroom thinking and watching the sky turn pink through the line of high windows. Blaming Miles seemed ludicrous, like accusing a bunny of killing a wolf. Just the other day, he had given me a fossil he'd found. He wanted to be a paleontologist when he grew up, and he said he'd name a dinosaur after me. Does that sound like somebody who would deliberately trick a teacher? I pulled Miles' DPRT drawing from the stack. Truly, it was one of the most distressing of them all. Every inch of the paper was obscured by blue scratches that I assumed represented driving rain. There was no discernible person, no raincoat, no umbrella. Poor Miles. Poor baby. And yet he was a strange little duck, with his antiquated speech patterns and his serial killer walk. And he had known an awful lot about Sadie. Plus, he had the means. He was regularly excused from class to participate in gifted activities, and he was always skipping recess or staying after school unsupervised, working on specialized assignments. I imagined him roaming the halls at night, stopping by our classroom for a snack. Before I could stop myself, I went over and I searched his desk, and the first thing I found broke my heart. It was a baggie with a pair of tighty-whities sealed inside. Writing on the outside was, "Put me on in case of pee-pee emergencies. Love Mother, XO." Oh Jesus, Miles, I thought. You can't keep this in your desk. If bullies saw this, they would eviscerate you. I spun around a few times, unable to decide what to do. The whole time holding that baggie with its terrible first-person message from the underwear's point of view but signed by his mom. Finally, I put it back, sliding it all the way down to the pencil graveyard at the bottom. Some people might interpret that baggie as an indication of an unnatural mother-son relationship, but not me. I don't buy into that Norman Bates nonsense. All they proved was that Miles was an unsophisticated boy with a disturbing lack of self-preservation skills. How could he be messing with me when he didn't even realize how severely he was already messing with himself? It exonerated him, in my book. Hordoff was wrong. As I lowered the desktop, I saw something familiar. A blue crayon with a few chop marks and part of the label peeled off. Had Miles taken it out of the extra desk? No, that was silly. Every grade schooler in the country probably had one just like it. I checked the smile box next. It was full. I sat on the story rug and I pulled out all of the notes. Like a kid with their Valentine's box. Giddy, it didn't last. Each piece of paper had a single word written on it. Sadie. Except for one, and that was even worse. Abigail Potter, victim of slaughter, fell off the slide and broke her neck and died. She wrote that name 2 times plus 1. And that's why her worthless life is done. Was this the Abigail Potter of the Butterfly Garden? Was she one of Sadie's victims? I thought back to the day the clock fell and Emily had mentioned somebody's name. Abby. Was this the same girl? I texted a picture of the ghoulish poem to Hordoff and he replied. Abby was a student at our school, maybe a decade ago. There used to be a fire escape with a big metal slide attached to the side of the building. Nobody was supposed to use it, but kids always played on it after hours. One night, Abigail fell off and she broke her neck. She passed away a few days later. Horrible. All of it. I shivered, remembering an earlier Smilebox message. The one about Mrs. Cross, and how Sadie had pushed her down the stairs. The next morning, we received a visit from Principal House. Knock knock, she said as she breezed in. The children sat up straight as she strode through the classroom, picking up items from their desks, examining them, and setting them back down. I hear we've been having some mysterious occurrences, she said. Damn that Hordoff, I thought. The traitor, he must have told her. The kids have been a little scared, I answered. We heard some strange noises. Children, have you been frightened? She asked the class. No, ma'am, they answered. Have you heard strange noises? No, ma'am. I couldn't believe it. They were traitors too. Principal House looked at me with exaggerated curiosity. It was a thumping sound, I explained, coming from the hallway. Well, this is an old building, so I suspect you've been hearing the pipes. It didn't sound like pipes. Water pipes, heating pipes. She stared at me, her features perfectly still except for one eyebrow which went up slightly. It's impossible to disagree with a face like that. Then again, I said, it's natural for pipes to clang and bang in an older building like this. Principal House gave me a big smile and she turned to the class. Children, as you are well aware, there is a sad and misguided fiction in this school, passed down from generation to generation. A hoax used to frighten new students and more gullible faculty members. You must refrain from indulging in such frivolous nonsense. Ghost stories have no place in an institution of learning, and they will not be tolerated. Do I make myself clear? Yes, ma'am, they answered. When she left, I followed her, closing the classroom door behind me, and we stood at the top of the steps. Did Mrs. Cross fall down the stairs? I asked. Is that how she hurt her back? Yes, it happened right here. She gestured towards the stairwell. What a nightmare. She landed halfway down, but we couldn't move her. Liability issues. We had to wait for the EMTs. What happened? Did somebody push her? Goodness no, what an awful thing to suggest, she frowned. There was jostling, certainly some accidental bumping with all the children going downstairs to lunch. That's why it's so important to always walk in single file. Single file, not a pile. That's my motto. One by one, walk, don't run, I added. Principal House gave me a look of grudging admiration. No more ghost stories, she said, pointing at me before heading down the stairs. "No, ma'am," I said. We didn't talk about Sadie after that. I stuffed the smile box into one of the cubbies and the children worked on projects. We went to lunch and recess in PE and music over and over, an endless monotonous rotation. We all pretended to forget about Sadie. But she didn't forget about us. It wasn't long before we heard that sound again. I was in the bathroom when suddenly there it was, that stomping like the sound of witches dancing around a fire. Their faces grotesque in the light of the flames. I finished my business and then cracked the door open, hoping to catch the perpetrator in the act. But the hallway was empty. The lights flickered and went off and back on again. I headed back to the classroom, this time checking behind each code. About halfway down the hallway, I found Miles, and I nearly had a heart attack. His hands were clenched into claws on either side of his face, and his hair stood on end from the static of the coat fabric. "What are you doing here?" I guided his arms down to his sides, but he didn't unclench his claws. "I was going to the bathroom, but there was something scary in there, so I hid." "It was me in the bathroom, Miles. You knew I was in there." He nodded. "Did you make that noise a few minutes ago?" I asked. "The thumping." He stared past me, eyes unfocused. "It was you," he said in a dazed voice. "Yes, it was me in the bathroom. We've established that." I straightened his glasses. "I have to pee," he whispered. I let him go. If I had kept him from the toilet for too long, he'd have to use his emergency baggie, and nobody wanted that. "It was the pipes," I told the kids when I returned to the classroom. Clanging and banging is natural for pipes in an older building like this. They watched me with worried eyes. "Are you okay?" asked Emma. Wednesday morning, and Sadie's desk was back in the classroom. Oh my God, I thought. Oh my God. Who was doing this and why? And since when had I started calling it Sadie's desk? It was an empty desk. Not Sadie's desk. The extra desk. The empty fucking extra desk. A person could go crazy in this place. I called the office and told them again about the desk, and they wrote out another work order. I had started to push it out of its row when I noticed somebody had vandalized the mural. They had added capital E's in blue crayon, filling in the final letter of Sadie whenever it was missing. Some were small and meticulous. Others had been made with big slashing strokes, tearing the butcher paper. I studied the kids as they came in and they took their seats. Who would notice the mural? Who would pretend not to? Which reaction indicated guilt? But nobody ever glanced at it. After they went to music, I went to get Hordoff, and he paced in front of it, squinting, hands in the pockets of his corduroys. "I don't get it," he said, looking at me. "Is this one of your psychological methods? Evasion therapy or something?" "What do you mean? Why did you add the E's?" "It wasn't me, I'm trying to figure out who it was." "But that's your handwriting. You make an E with the 3 lines pointing upwards. I noticed it right away. They're like little birds on a landscape painting. Look." From his pocket, he pulled a receipt I had written my name and phone number on when we first met. He pointed to the first letter of my name. He was right, it was similar. I felt dizzy. "Do you think somebody imitated my handwriting?" I whispered. "No, Aaron, that's not what I'm saying at all," he said. "Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should lie down." "No thanks, I'm kinda busy here." He watched me for a moment too long, and then he let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, I get it. This is a joke, right?" "Why would it be a joke?" "Because you did this, Aaron." What a condescending bastard Hordoff was. I should have noticed earlier, back when he had tattled on me to Principal House. Not to mention how creepy it was that he kept that receipt in his pocket. Did he have an unhealthy fixation on me? Maybe he just never washed his pants, and he was acting like I was the crazy one. "Yeah, I was kidding," I said, forcing a fake laugh. "Thanks for your help, Hordoff. You're the best." He lingered indecisively, hands in his pockets again, probably fondling my phone number. I steered him out of the door to the top of the stairs. How satisfying it would feel to push him, I thought. To watch him fall, his hands scrabbling for purchase. To hear his scream, his scraping bones. But instead, I let him walk away. his rubber-soled teaching shoes squeaking, not nearly as silent as he thought. I sat on Sadie's desk and I studied the defaced mural. The children couldn't have done that. They were too afraid, but could it really still be a prank? It was such a stupid risk. First, there was the danger of getting caught. And second, why gamble with the possibility of accidentally releasing an evil ghost child into the school? It's like stepping on a crack or walking under a ladder. If you have the choice, why not avoid it? I tore the mural off the wall. It came down in long, satisfying strips. And then I went back and shredded it some more, separating each blue E from the rest of the name. Halfway through I stopped, immobilized by thought. Had Sadie done this? Had she figured out a way to finish her own name and bring herself into existence? No, it didn't work that way. Take Bloody Mary as an example. Supposedly, she'll appear if you repeat her name while staring into a mirror in a darkened room. But she can't say her own name to make herself appear. If that were the case, Bloody Mary would be popping out willy-nilly in dark bathrooms around the world. Of course, I realize it's not the perfect analogy. I'm not crazy. I know Bloody Mary isn't real. Blanket Fort Friday. I brought sheets and blankets from home and we draped them over the desk and chairs. The kids crawled around underneath like groundhogs, giggling and whispering. They worked on their projects inside the forts and I played music on my phone. Such a perfect activity for a rainy day. Miles had made a hide-off out by himself under a table. Gifted children need space and time to create their narratives and fill their own silences. He peeked out and motioned me over. "Are you angry with us?" he asked when I lifted the corner of his blanket. "Of course not. Why would you think that?" "You took down our mural." We both glanced at the back wall. "I'm going to put up fresh paper and on Monday we'll start a new mural and make it the happiest one in the world." Miles seemed pleased, but then he frowned. "I dreamed about Sadie last night. She was floating in a dark place, dark as a black hole. She was singing about bluebirds, and when I got closer to hear the song, she pushed me. I fell for a long time, like Abigail Potter. My mom said I was screaming so loud I woke her up." "Oh, Miles," I said. "It was only a dream. You're safe now." He tugged the blanket out of my hand, closing off his fort. When he spoke, his voice seemed distant. "My mom said she'll take me out of the school if this doesn't stop." "What?" "You have to stop it. Please." "Don't worry, Miles, I'll take care of it." He wouldn't let me open the flap, so I patted his shoulder through the blanket. I went back to my desk, thinking about my earlier days at the school, and how I'd expected I had a higher purpose for being here. I'd helped the kids begin the healing process, yes, but now I knew more was required of me. I had to take Sadie down. But how? I'd kept a few pieces of the murals, some of the bits with a blue E. I leafed through them, hoping for a clue. They really did resemble birds in a painting, little bluebirds, but it didn't mean anything. Underneath the mural pieces, I found the newspaper article Mrs. Cross had kept. The one about how child ghosts sometimes get attached, leech-like, to an object they loved. My eyes fell on Sadie's desk, now covered with a pink sheet, and I wondered. We didn't hear the hopscotching again until late afternoon. Oh, that ominous rhythmic thumping like savage drums in a dark jungle. The banging and echoing, rising and falling, closing in from every direction. Menacing. Inescapable. Those poor kids, they wouldn't even look outside their forts. How good it would feel to run through that dark hallway, flinging aside the coats, ripping up that carpet. Or maybe just covering my ears and screaming. Whatever it took to stop the noise. But instead, I turned up the music, folded my hands on my desk, and I smiled, biding my time. I had a plan. Whenever it's raining at dismissal, we gather the students in the front entrance of the school and escort them one by one to cars or buses, holding an umbrella over their heads. It's chaotic, and I didn't get to say goodbye to most of my students, not even Miles. I never even saw him leave. Everything felt wrong, like I had forgotten something important, and the feeling stayed with me as I went through the school, up the stairs and into the classroom, dripping water all the way. I leaned my umbrella against the wall, took off my raincoat and threw it over a chair by the radiator. The kids had taken down all the forts except Sadie's. The first thing I did was check inside it. That's just common sense, like looking behind a hotel shower curtain or making sure the backseat of a car is empty before driving. Everyone does it, and if they don't, they should. Outside, the rain kept falling, and the room grew darker. The school descended into silence. When I thought everyone had gone home, I pulled off the sheet and I sat in Sadie's desk. I opened the lid. Nothing inside, not even the blue crayon. Behind me I heard rumbling, maybe thunder, maybe ghostly feet running on carpet. The lights flickered and went out, and the desktop slipped from my grasp, smashing the fingers on my other hand. I screamed. It was easy this time, pushing Sadie's desk across the classroom, even in the dark, even with my injured hand. I didn't slow down as I shrieked across the floor when I reached the stairs. I just shoved that son of a bitch straight over the top. The crashing was like music as the desk fell to the next landing. The lights flickered back on and I saw it down there, vanished and broken. Sadie's favorite thing. I lurched back into the classroom, clutching my throbbing hand to my chest. Had it worked? Was she gone? How could I tell for sure? I wrote on the chalkboard, Sadie, Sadie, Sadie. I turned towards the back hallway, waiting. It was empty now, silent, dark as a black hole. Thunder cracked and I jumped, staggering backwards into the chalk tray. My upper back slammed against the chalkboard so hard it forced the breath out of me. I grabbed my purse, ran out of the room and down the stairs, dodging the remains of the desk. Once outside, I realized I had forgotten my raincoat and umbrella, but there was no way I was going back up there. So I ran to my car, holding my purse over my head. Physically, I was miserable driving home, soaking wet, my smashed hand throbbing and my back aching from bashing against the chalkboard tray. But emotionally, I was triumphant. In my apartment, I went to the bathroom mirror to see how nasty the bruise would be from the chalk tray, and I almost passed out. Across the back of my sweater, smeared but legible, were the words, Sadie, Sadie, Sadie. I wrestled it off and held it up to examine it. The writing was backwards, so in the mirror it had appeared forward. It was the print of my own handwriting, from when I had fallen against the chalkboard. I smiled, feeling silly, but also imagining the kids' reaction when I recounted the story. I thought of a project we could do with mirror writing, but I never got the chance. Principal House called the next day to inform me that the school didn't need my services anymore. The children are frightened, she said. We've received complaints. I know, I said, but I fixed it. They won't be scared now. She sighed. The children will be speaking to a psychologist, and if I may, I'd like to suggest you do the same. I closed my eyes. Sometimes I wondered if I'd made things worse. What if destroying the desk hadn't worked? What if Sadie was still there, unfettered and free? What if she'd never been there at all? I pushed my doubts away. I'll pack up your belongings, Principal House was saying. You may pick them up from the front office during school hours. Please do not contact the children. I didn't go right away. I couldn't deal with it, I guess. And then last week, I was digging through my purse for a cough drop and I found a blue crayon, the label peeled off. Teeth marks. It reminded me of Miles, so I finally went back and got my stuff. Everything had been packed into a cardboard box. Raincoat, umbrella, notebooks, sweaters, and the smile box. There was something in it. I unlocked it and I pulled out a folded piece of paper and opened it. At first, it seemed like nothing but blue crayon scribbles covering the page. And then I realized it was a drawing of a person in the rain, shown from the perspective of high above and beyond. It was a woman without a raincoat or an umbrella. her hands holding something above her head. And on her back, smeared but legible, was the same word 3 times, written backwards.